started, first of all, what I'd like to ask you is, how did you initially discern the call to pastoral ministry? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Gosh, years ago now, it seems like another life. I became a follower of Christ late in high school or early college. And had one of those profound moments, kind of the Apostle Paul thing, the profound conversion experience, where I could tell you exactly where I was and what was going on. Unlike my wife, who could tell you it happened sometime in the season, type of thing. Mine was just really crystal clear. I wanted to be a lawyer. I'd read a book by F. Lee Bailey called The Defense Never Rests, and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be a lawyer. And then I began to get this stirring in my conscience, in my soul. I don't know the best way to explain it, but it began to get this stirring, and the thought over and over again went like this. Just think how much grief I would have saved you if you'd have known me earlier. Just think how much grief, how much sorrow, how much pain I would have saved you if you'd have known me earlier. And it became very clear that was for me, God's voice speaking to me, the Spirit of God nudging me. And so that at that point, I began to recognize what he was asking me to do. Then it was to engage with others, to save them the grief, to know Christ earlier. So my first 3 years of ministry, I was involved in high school, in middle school, college ministry. And then what I did during that season, I got married, my wife and I began to get around some older couples, and we went through various times where he said, will you affirm for us, is this where we need to be? Are we pursuing the right thing? Or have we come to the end of being in vocational ministry, time to do something else? And so we would go through these seasons like that, and we'd get around these older couples that knew us well. We allowed them to speak into our life. And what they did then is affirm the gifts, and they recognized, forgive this language, the anointing, the call on our life. And so that has kind of spurred us on.
Okay. Well, just as you think about 20 plus years now in pastoral ministry, is that right? Yeah, 20 plus years. Okay. As you look back over pastoral ministry, can you identify, maybe, I know it's hard to probably single one out, but like sort of a high point in pastoral ministry?
Yeah. The reason you have many. For one, I love seeing people walk over the line of faith. Love that. At our church, we celebrate by lighting a candle. Every Sunday we have what we call the Jesus candle lit for John 8, Jesus light of the world. And then we would light candles when somebody moves from spiritual dark to spiritual light. So that's always to me. We read those stories. It's always a highlight for me. But this, I would say in the last several months, the highlight over a period of a season is we are one church in 3 locations, and we had our 3 campus pastors up front. And for a long time, we were a church that was predominantly Caucasian. And we had purpose to try to look more like the city. So up on the stage one morning was our 3 campus pastors, an Italian, an African American, and an Asian. And I remember a couple things going through my mind at that point, just sitting back going, thank you, God. Thank you that you've allowed me to experience this. One, the diversity in our leadership, and in that we have a vision. Our vision is to see 1% of the city of Chicago walk across the line of faith, get assimilated in biblical communities. 29,000. And that's what we're asking God for. Give us 29,000. And not us alone. The old mother church would take the same challenge and really lean into Chicago. To see those 3 up there, it was like God, you're working our vision. You're unfolding. You are blowing wind into the sails of what you call us to do. That was a great moment. Great for me.
What about, you talked a little bit about low point. It sounds like you really just come out of a season of discouragement, but as you look back, can you say this was a real low point?
Let me give you one even more recent. There was somebody in my church, and I'll leave it that vague. There was somebody in my church that is a pain in the butt. Can I just say that? I know, it's hard to believe. But just a pain in my side. Just a difficult, hard person. And they told me they were leaving the church. And frankly, my insides, I celebrated. It's terrible. It was like, you go, okay, wow, yeah, I understand. It makes sense. And it's then we started teaching through the book of James. And I recognized that this person was my tribe. And this person came back to me. Then my heart needed to change. Then I began to go, you know what? God, I don't think I'm done learning what I need to learn from this person. and then to go back and put my arm around this person and to lovingly pastor them. They needed to stay. They didn't need to go. I wanted them to go. They needed to stay. And to encourage them to stay. And for them to stay. For those several months in there, what I figured out was a miserable season. Hard. Until I recognized this person was truly a gift. And I could look at them differently. And then you know what happens? Your compassion level goes up. You know, your empathy, your grace increases for that person. I'm not saying it's any easier. I still see them, and it's still tough. But my attitude toward it is different. And I just came out of that. That happened this summer, this fall.
Can you flesh out like why that was so hard? Like why you think that was so prolonged and so hard?
Yeah, I think it's some of what I was talking about being discouraged. God is very gracious to reveal our idols and to reveal our weaknesses and our incomplete views of faith. And this person was revealing some of that stuff. And I didn't like it. They were not an issue. Do they have problems? They do. But really they were revealing my problems. And I didn't like that. I didn't like having to re-look at that level of the depth of my heart and go, man, you are a sick, broken, damaged person, still needing a boatload of grace. And then, you know, once you get there, then you go, I'm okay. I'm just a beggar looking for a loaf of bread, and I know where to go to eat.
Well, as you are engaged in ministry in the city, I mean, ministry in urban setting is obviously pretty different, I think, in many ways. But as you look at sort of the socio-cultural trends that are going on around you, are there any big trends that you see on the horizon that are shaping the way that you're currently doing ministry? Any things that you're like, this is really having an impact on how we do ministry?
Just a couple of years ago, there's been a tipping point around the world where more people living in urban centers than living in suburban or rural contexts. There's more people in the city. So we're recognizing that is just true, and we're trying to be very mindful of that. You know, cities have a tendency to be places of art and power and government and education and a number of those things. So how do we then be mindful as a church being in the city of Chicago? Again, it's not the only place to be. There's many other places. I was in a suburban context for many, many years. But the city is changing. And right now, it's very sexy to plant churches in the city. You probably know that. You probably hear that. We have a lot of church planters coming to the city, so that would be one. Something that we're seeing, the average age in my church, we just did a survey we do every couple of years. We just did a survey. The average age at our church right now is 32. And we're 55% single. Young professionals. Everybody's got an education, just to give you context. We're 17% diverse right now, just to give you an idea. We're 17% diverse. They say the church is diverse when it gets to 20%. You know, we're shooting for 25%. We want to look more like the city. With our demographics, some of the things we're learning, or some of the things we backed into, some of the things we've been purposed on are these smaller, not bigger contexts. My generation likes big. 20s, millennials, young 30s, they want smaller. They want to be in a place that feels like family. They want to be known. I'm speaking generally. That's not true of everyone, but I'm speaking generally. So when we do our campuses, we want our campuses to be smaller. We want our campuses to have more of a family feel. When our campuses get to certain sizes, we want to go to 2 services right away to keep the small feel. Like our campus in University Village seats 150. So if we got to go, we'll go to 2 services before we go to a different location. That's one. 2, we're dealing with a generation that can hold in one hand Orthodox Christian beliefs, and on the other hand, incredible other worldly views, and don't understand how there's any conflict between them. Our premarital class has more and more people that are not just sleeping together. I mean, that's always been an ongoing issue, that are living together and who confirm that they are evangelical, Orthodox, conservative believers. And what's the big deal? And here's what's hard. And their parents who are Orthodox, believing Christians affirm it. And so they hold to these 2 hands. The other thing that we see is that we're dealing with a generation who wants you to speak the truth to them. It's like, punch me right in the face. I want to hear it. I might not agree with you, but I want to hear it. But what we choose to do, and how does it drip with grace? So we cover hard topics. Our elders several years ago decided that we were going to teach through books, and we were going to teach through topics as they came up. So we did Romans. We had a whole week on homosexuality. We go through Corinthians. We're talking a lot on divorce and sexuality and all those kind of issues. Drinking. Two big issues for us is sex and drinking at Park. We know that. We know those are our two big issues. And so we have this issue where people hold this in one hand and this on the other. But speak truth to me. I regularly have in our services, when we say something hard, people get up and leave. Now, when I first said that to our elders, they thought, no, they're going to the bathroom. Go, not with their coat and their boyfriend in tow. No. And now they see it too. And so many times, if you go to Park, one of the things I'll need to say is, let me get through this whole thought before you leave. Let me say this whole thing before you decide to leave. But you know who's leaving? It's not the non-believing folks. 10% of our church self-describe themselves as non-followers of Christ. We think it's probably higher because we have a lot of Catholics. Catholic, I'm not taking a shot at you, or mainline denominations where they really don't understand the true depth and essence of the gospel. And so they're not the ones who are leaving. It's the churched people who are leaving. You get up and leave. They're the ones that give the hardest feedback on some of the stances that we choose to take. We are a complementarian church. And we're a complementarian church, one, because we believe Scripture is very clear, but we're in the context of an urban setting. You can imagine the pushback we get. Our elders teach once a year. We get them all up front. And our elders teach. We gain people and lose people every year. People who go, how come we don't have women in leadership? They can't support it. They haven't thought about it. They just don't think it's fair. And others who are saying, I'm finally glad that the church is willing to stand here. So that's kind of some of the stuff we deal with on a regular basis. We have a lot of folks battling with homosexuality sitting in our seats. We welcome them, we invite them, come be part of a small group, engage in conversation with us. Let us walk with you, talk with you. We're not going to shame you, but we have a very clear understanding on that issue. Because we believe Scripture speaks. But it's no different than other things, right? Gossip and lying and any number of things. So that's some of the stuff we see trending process.
Okay, that's helpful. Well, let's go ahead and open it up to questions. So who's going to lead off? Questions?
I have a question, actually.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
Yeah, just about the culture of Chicago, if we are interested, like you said, in doing church planting in the city, or just being a pastor at an existing church down the road, are there things specifically in Chicago that we should know culturally, especially if we're not originally from this area? I'm from the South, so I've been trying to figure things out. And
I've been here 13 years and I still.
So, yeah, just, you need to know this about Chicagoans in general. Any insights like that?
Good question. Yeah, there's a couple things I would say to you. One is understand Chicago's made up of neighborhoods, and people identify, you ask them where they live, they tell you their neighborhood. I live in Lincoln Park, I live in Lakeview, I live in Irving Park. Neighborhoods are very important. Now, neighborhoods are changing. They're not as distinct as they used to be in terms of you grew up there, stayed there, those kind of things. But understand neighborhoods. Two, understand there is a large, influential Latino group of people, almost 25% in the city of Chicago. Understand there's a great divide in the north and south, White Sox and Cubs. You need to understand that. But African Americans predominantly live on the south side. And how do we reach them? How do we engage with them? Because that's not the culture, for instance, you might have grown up with and understand well. So you understand those groups. We have more Poles that live in Chicago than in Warsaw. How do we understand the distinct groups? When you move out of the Loop and out of the lakefront, Lincoln Park, Lakeview, Wrigleyville, the Loop area, even south to a degree, you start moving out, people have been there for a while. There's more permanence. Along the lakefront, people are moving in and out all the time. We turn over 25% every 3 years. People are moving. They're in the suburbs, changing jobs or whatever. 25%. So that's a very different group than if I moved to Irving Park, for instance, where families have been there and settled and established. And you have to know those things. I would say talk with me too. We have partnered with a couple other churches, Holy Trinity and Moody, and we're looking for some others that we had called it Church Planting Network that we are starting, where we want to support existing church plants and launch church plants out of our own thing. My personal vision There's 77 major neighborhood regions. There's 217 smaller neighborhoods. I would like to see a church in every one of those 217 neighborhoods in Chicago. So we're looking for people who come and roll up their sleeves and stand there. It ain't for the faint of heart. Especially if you go up to Rogers Park, West Rogers Park, very tough. Albany Park, very tough. Very diverse. The high school in Rogers Park, I forgot, I think it's like 65 different languages are spoken at the high school. So, again, you just got to learn. But there are guys who can help you navigate it. That's more than you wanted to know. That's what happens when you ask a pastor a question.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. You wait for the microphone because we're recording.
You said that you're planning to move up to 25% diversification. What is your strategy?
There's a couple things. What's interesting is our people come to our church and go, I want to be in a more diverse church. So my first question to them is, I go, describe to me your 3 or 4 closest friends. What color are they? Well, they're all white. Okay, so you want to go to a church that's doing it, but you're not. Is that what you're telling me? So, 2 strategies. One is, I've got to be more mindful of what it means to be inclusive. And we have to change the leadership level. So, our pastors, we're changing. And our elder board has changed. So, we have a Latino now on our elder board. We have an African on our elder board. So, we're trying to be more diverse as we look at our leadership structure. So, we want to model it. Because one of the main things is people come in, and who's up front is how they determine whether they'll be comfortable. Do I see myself up front? Are people like me in positions of power, if I can use that authority and leadership? But at the same time, am I willing, at my level? I'll give you something that happened for us. We started having a gospel group come in and sing. And people thought it was really fun for once. And then they want to go, where's my music? Where's that, where's Chris Tomlin? Where's that stuff? You go, okay, so you want to be in a diverse church as long as it's fitting your needs. Are you willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of somebody else? We had a salsa group there. Are you willing to be comfortable for the sake of Latinos? You go, man, that's it. That's my music. That sings to my soul. So it's hard. It's a very hard work. Very few churches in America are doing it well. And very few are large. Usually they're smaller because you got issues. Daniel Hill at River City, good friend, great guy, has worked from the beginning to be multicultural. And I've learned a ton from sitting with him, a ton. So that's our story.
With the turnover ratio you talk about, I imagine you have a sort of nucleus at your church and been there for a while. How do you do ministry with people you know are going to come and leave? And do you treat your maybe core group different from the rest of the people? How do you really do it?
25% of our church have been there longer than me. 25. I've been there 7 years. So for 75% of the church, I'm the only pastor they know. That's almost like nowhere else I've ever been. And so one of the things is you just know. So we look at it kind of like a collegiate ministry, you know what I mean? Kind of like a college. You understand you're just going to have turnover. So we try to build long benches. So when we develop leadership, we try to think 2 or 3 people out. But here's what typically happens on a Sunday. Sunday, someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, I got transferred to Denver." So you look down at, you look down your bench and you go to the next person. They go, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, I'm going to Dallas." So now you're 3 in. So one of the things we have to do is we have to stick staff into holes. We have to have staff to step up regularly and stick into holes. The thing we're trying to lean into heavy is get families to stay. A couple weeks ago, I gave a message about the city, and I went after our families in a very loving, gracious way. But I went after our families. Because our families are the ones that are most connected, have the most connection in the fabric of the city through schooling, Boy Scouts, sports, and all those kind of things. If you can get families to stay, if people can see they can raise a family, it is difficult. The cost of living and schooling are the 2 big issues. If you can help families navigate that, living in the city is a great way to raise children. They'll be your stability. They'll be your anchors, and you can build ministry around them. Singles are a little tougher unless they get married, and then you challenge them to stay. One of the things we regularly say to our people, you're thinking about being here for 2? Why don't you ask God for 4? You're thinking about being here for 4? Why don't you ask God for 8? When we get our people to think that way, they'll last and stick and engage. Here's why. Every time someone moves from the city, they take the light with them. Right? They take the light of Christ with them. So that's some of the things we got to do. We have to build along the bench, we have to have staff step in, and we have to encourage our people to think about abstaining. We talk about the difference between a citizen and a tourist. A tourist comes to Chicago, enjoys all the benefits, but doesn't care about any of the issues, right? You know, you visit another city, you go to New York, the bum on the street, that's not my issue. The homeless person, that's not my issue. I'm a tourist, I'm here to enjoy. A citizen says, those are my issues. School system, my issue. Mayor race, my issue. They roll up their sleeves and they get engaged. How do we help our people to say, if you're here for a year or 10 years, think like a citizen?
How do the families respond to that?
You know, some very well. Some of them, one of the things I did is I emailed 8 or 9 moms and asked them questions. What's great about raising kids in the city and what's difficult? And I shared that. I go, here's what mom said. And so we had a number of families come back and go, you know, I hadn't thought of it that way. I didn't think about the benefits. And at the same time, we had others who felt like I was strong on it. Or, you know, the pastor's powering up. Yeah, I guess I am.
What are some ways that your desire for diversity has changed the way that you go about writing sermons?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, very insightful question. I am more mindful.
Like that.
I am more mindful of what communicates broader, and I'm more engaged with people who are not like me. Now remember, I'm 54. My average age is 32. I'm already dad, right? I'm already speaking to another generation, right? In our church, sometimes 2 or 3 different generations, so I have to think that way. But I also need to think diversity in terms of what we communicate or not communicate. And so I try to be broader than some of the illustrations that I use, some of the language that I use. I grew up in New Orleans until I was 15. Cotton picking was just something we said. I don't say cotton picking much anymore. Because someone corrected me on it. I didn't think twice about it. And they said it's offensive. Thank you. Okay, yeah, I probably shouldn't say.
Just to come back a bit to what you said about the discouragement. Yeah, so I mean, to me the difference between disappointment and discouragement is kind of clear, but how would you discern between discouragement and, you know, God maybe calling you to some other things, or just about, you know, being used in some other ways by God, and just, I mean, because you want to be in reality as well, you know,
So like the struggle itself could be a way that God is saying to you, you're done here and I want to move you on.
Yeah, sort of, and just, yeah, I mean that maybe you're gifted to some of the things, or, you know, there's, yeah.
Good question. Counsel. You get counsel on that. You don't make a decision that way. You don't make a decision, I would say, on that until you move through the difficulty, because the tendency is when pain will cause us to make poor decisions. Because we're pain avoiders. Right? How do I avoid this pain? How do I stop this from hurting? And we make decisions that aren't wise. I was a pastor in Holland, Michigan for a couple of years at a church plant. And I was there, and this, you know, again, ministry's ministry, and, you know, things are tough. It's just life, right? Sheep bite. Okay. And so we had some sheep who were biting in my old church. I was at a church for 9 years. My old church called and said, would you come back? Which is very unusual. And I wanted to go back. And a woman in the church came and put her arm around me, an older woman who would come weekly, and I didn't know this, someone told me, lay hands on my door and pray for me every week. And when I learned that, she obviously, you know, I loved that and appreciated her, and she spoke a lot of truth in my life. She put her arm around me and she said to me, this is not the time for you to go. She said, God's not done teaching you what you need to learn here yet. I did not want to hear that. But she was absolutely right. She was absolutely right. And the next year I learned more. It was fruitful and deeply fruitful in my own life for a number of things. So I would say you go through difficult times, get counsel. Invite other people in. Ask them, is this a wise thing for me to do right now? Or wait. And ask the question, why is it not fruitful? Because sometimes grace, right? Let me just cover the grace. Sometimes people in seminary, in grad school, are here not because you have been encouraged, but you laid hands on yourself. And you want to preach, and you shouldn't inflict yourself on anybody preaching. That's not your gift. You have other gifts. You need to find out how God has made you and be as fruitful as you can in the ways in which God has made you. But maybe this role is not the role, but you're here because you want to be here, not because the elders in your church, the leadership around you, is affirming that about you. So if it's a difficult time, get counseling, because they may say, yeah, this isn't where you need to be, or it may be, hang in there. It's just a tough time. Does that make sense? Clear as mud?
Kind of going along with that, what do you think are benefits to ministering where you're from? You're from New Orleans, you said? Or
in California. Yeah, high school,
California.
college, California.
What do you think are benefits to ministering where you're from as opposed to ministering where you're not from and vice versa?
Well, you're an insider where you're from, right? If you minister from where, I don't know, you grew up in Iowa, in a smaller town, and you understand the people know you, you're an authentic follower of Christ, you live incredibly, you're an insider. When I moved to Chicago, I had to, the friend was asking, I had to learn all that stuff. I had to become a student. That takes time. It was like pushing a boulder up Mount Everest, trying to understand and learn that. If I grew up here, one of our pastors on the south side, our University Village campus, was born here, went to high school here, went to college here, got married here, and intends to die here. And he's a White Sox fan, which we forgive. He didn't have anything to learn. He just rolls out of bed and he gets it. And it shows in the way in which he engages and thinks and processes, different than anybody else on our staff, because none of us are from Chicago. All of us are transplants. But the other side is, a transplant also sees things with fresh eyes. Sometimes is able to say things and do things that those that have been here have missed and don't see.
I have a question about, I'm worried to ask a question because I might sound like the old curmudgeon, but just thinking about your sermon on Isaiah 6, 1-6, and then thinking about, I was struck by a couple of things you said. One was that drinking and sex is something you struggle with in part, and I've noticed, churches in the city that's not an unusual thing, and I think probably when you said it, a lot of us was like, yeah, what else is new? But it seems to me like a pretty, in part depressing, and two, somewhat concerning, and not least because of the generation that's coming up. This notion, again, you mentioned it, you can have this orthodox convictions in one hand and then this other contradictory thing going on. That's just it seems to me that's accentuating with sort of teenagers and sociologist studies that have been done on moral therapeutic deism and all of that. And it just strikes me that that's just a problem. Like, not just, we're sinners saved by grace, but it just seems to be a problem. And I guess my question is, can you give us some insight or pointers as to how you're in the pastoral staff, what are ways that God is helping you to deal with this kind of issue pastorally?
First, I would say every church has its issues. Every culture has its issues. Wherever there's a church that has people, they will have sinful issues. Because people bring their stuff. We do know sex and drinking are issues for us, and they are serious issues that we address and we talk through regularly. We deal with it a number of ways. We deal with it relationally, addressing it, talking about it. We go to where they go. Our singles pastor, JR, goes to their events and hangs out and watches and observes and just engages with life, and then has opportunities to have teachable moments around some of the things that take place. You must address issues, but you must address them graciously, compassionately, truthfully. Same thing with people who are sleeping together, living together. We will not do weddings. We will not officiate weddings where couples living together. But here's what we'll do. We will provide a place. If a couple comes in, and here's the number one reason. Financial. Well, I got out of my lease 3 months before she did, and she's got a place. I'm just going to move. It's just simpler. And I understand that. I understand. On paper, I understand that. Here's what we do. I'll take you in. Come live with me. I got a couch. I got an extra room. we're going to take that excuse away from them to find out what the real issue is. Now, sometimes that's the issue, and they go, thank you. Other times it's not, and then let's address what the real issue is. And then we eventually have to say, and we do, we say, I'm sorry, I cannot be a part when you make a conscious decision to live in disobedience to what God has designed. Can't do it. We love you. We hope you stay here. We want to walk with you through this. We want to lean in hard on these issues, but I can't do it. And don't think that doesn't make people mad. That's when sheep have sharp teeth. Because here's the card they pull. I tithe. That's my favorite one. I tithe. Like they think it's a company and they've got stock. But that's the stuff. But that's you gotta address those. The other thing we do is we teach on it. Whenever it comes up in Scripture, we teach on it. We teach on it. We teach on it. Graciously, clearly, dripping with the gospel, but confrontationally. Here's what it says. We choose as teachers too. As I did this morning, we call it incarnational preaching. We choose to include our people in our spiritual journey too. So it's not this, it's this. It's not you stop, it's we all need to grow. We all need to be mindful. God's working in my life too, which allows them to be engaged in a bigger conversation. And that's very much an age thing too. My age doesn't necessarily, especially my parents, they didn't want to hear their pastor talk about his failures. This generation, they delight in knowing that I put my pants on just like they do. And that we're processing and moving it through. That doesn't mean that I don't need to live a life of purity and holiness. Absolutely I need to do. But I will struggle, and we are willing to share and include people in our struggle, which then allows me to speak to theirs.
First of all, I'd like to commend you for bridging not only like the generational gap, but the racial gap. That's something that's pretty heavy on my heart. From what I'm hearing, I've heard a lot about, inner city and just really focusing on staying in the city and that kind of thing. I was just wondering what your stance was on, say, foreign missions. Does that enter into the picture anywhere? Is that
Yeah. I was telling you about our vision for the city, 1%. Our vision statement is to be a biblical community where the gospel of Jesus Christ transforms lives, renews the city, and impacts the world. So we know with our demographic that they're willing to go to some of the tougher, more difficult places in the world. We have focused on the 1040 window, purposely Muslim. So we have a work in Turkey. We have a work in the land of Sheba. We have a work in, we're partnering with a church in Eastern Africa that is working with Somalis. We were looking at Somaliland, and we went there and looked at it. I went on that trip. That's just, that is so new. There's a lot more things before we can partner in there. So we're going to get 2 steps back and work with somebody who's already begun that work. We work with an orphanage in Mexico, and where they are, believe it or not, there's a number of unreached people groups down in Oaxaca that have never heard the gospel, which I know. I'm surprised. It shocked me. It shocked me. Maybe not you, but it shocked me. So we're engaged with an orphanage, and out of that orphanage through there. So we have a purposeful, focused missions, because I believe that we need to be world-thinking, engaging Christians. We have chosen to go city to city. Is another thing that we do. We want to go to what we call gateway cities, go to other large cities around the world that we are going to engage. We can't do it all, so that's why we pick 1040 window cities, Muslim, hard.
My question was going back to what you were saying about multiculturalism. Definitely my experience with culture has been kind of absorbed and marinated in it through time, and I guess just following a majority group. I'm in a Latin American neighborhood, and I'm the minority there, and I kind of run that. That's the tension that I do see with multicultural churches, and that's one that I'm always eager to find out how you guys address that tension, or how you guys are able to, I guess, represent a culture if they're not that culture. You know what I'm saying? Like, how?
Just say it again. Just say it again.
Yeah, if you're how you could represent multiple cultures when culture is just one of those things that you got to live through it. You know, you can't just put it up on the stage and there we go, but you know everything about it. You know, so just one of my questions is like, how as a multicultural church, you guys approach that or address that?
It's a learn. We're nowhere near where we want to be. There's a lot of things we do wrong. You know, we step on our tongue, we say foolish things, we hurt somebody's feelings all the time. So I would say to you, I don't know yet. We're learning. You know, one of our pastors is Asian, he's Chinese. I have learned a ton. He's first generation. I've learned a ton from him. You know, what does it mean to navigate that? What does that look like? One of the things I've found, for instance, with our Asian community that I'm learning is that when you sit down with them, you ask them to do something, they are respectful and it's yes. And then they don't do it. But I found that's a cultural thing, because they're never going to tell you no. They're never going to say to your face, because you're the authority, no. But they don't do it. And I was getting frustrated until I understood, okay, that's something now I need to re-navigate how I engage in conversation. I've got to learn. I've got to make the effort to say, I'm going to learn how to speak in a language that makes sense to you. But it's still a learn. It's still a learn. We're only 17%. In the church our size, it's a very small piece of people. A very small piece. So we're not near. We're like Daniel. If Daniel was here, he could address that, speak to that. He lives it. He understands it far better than I understand it.
Especially in light of the high turnover in your church, what does discipleship look like?
Small groups are everything for us. We want you to be in a small group. We believe life change takes place best, not only, but best in a small group. Because we believe that I can't know everybody's name, but it's important to me that somebody knows everybody's name. So if you're in a small group, in a small community, you're speaking truth, leaning into each other, pushing each other. We have what we have designed, and we call the mature Christian profile. What's a maturing Christian at Park look like? We have 5 starting points. We've identified 5 starting points when people come to Park. We have questioners, those who aren't followers of Christ yet. We have beginners. We have a lot of people just over the line of faith. We have people who are renewed. They walked away from God. They come to Chicago. There's not a lot of ways to meet people. Church is one way. They come to our church because of the demographic. They get engaged. They get renewed in the faith they once had. And we have people who are spiritually stalled. We're trying to move everybody to what we call spiritual transformation. So we go, what does a spiritually transforming person look like? Pursuing God, connecting, and investing. And so we kind of hold that out there, and we push, and we lean, and we encourage. And we try to do our teaching around those things. We have what we call the collegiate. It's graduate level information without graduate level work. Is the way we describe it. So we bring in professors and do New Testament, we do theology, we do perspectives on the world missions, we do a number of things around that, and we invite our people to come. Because again, we have a very educated group. They want information. We say that's a aspect, not the only aspect, but an aspect of this discipleship process. But really, the best thing is relationship, person to person. Me knowing you, you knowing me, you being willing to speak truth into my life with grace. And it's tough, because just about the time you begin to see the fruitfulness, they have taken a job and are now living in San Francisco. And you go, bless you. Thank you for being here.
This question is mainly geared towards your relationship with your wife. As far as church planning together, in what ways was she able to help you plan? And what did you appreciate about that?
Always found Donna's the best thing about me, honestly. My wife is far smarter, more talented, gifted. I caught her in a weak moment. She said yes to me. I've been a part of 3 church plants. I love church planting. At one time, I thought, Donna and I really thought what we were going to do was to be itinerant church planters. Go somewhere for 2 years, get up and run, turn it over, and go to the next one. I loved it. But it's a young man's person's game. So we're not doing it now. I'm blessing other people to go. We used our home a lot. Get your people in your home. We did a lot of studies. My wife leads a thing that we call a Bible reading group, where you just read the Gospel of John and only do observation. It levels the playing field with believers and non-believers. You just do observation. What's the text say? Not what you think it says, not interpretation. just pure observation, and Donna's a master at it. And we've done that with a lot of non-believers over the years, and seen God do amazing, gracious work and drawn people over the line of faith. She's great that way. She also leans into women really well. My wife's a very strong lady, and she does great with talking with other women about their role and who they are and their person and what does it mean to be utilized in the kingdom. Well, yeah, great partner, great partner. And again, if you're going to church plant, one of the things you got to make sure that both people agree to it. Because nothing will take more time, nothing will be more draining, nothing can be more hopeful and exciting and disappointing all at the same time. And if the spouse, the wife, is not engaged in that in some way, shape, or form, I'm not saying they have to work to the level of the husband, in some way, shape, or form, it will create tension and will show cracks in the marriage. You didn't ask for that last piece, that's free.
Time for a couple more questions. I was wondering what you would consider the most important qualities in someone aspiring to do urban ministry.
Know the gospel. Know the gospel. Know the gospel. Know Jesus. Love Jesus. Walk with Jesus. Make sure your identity is driven through the cross. Because if it's people, if it's success or failure, it's things we're talking about today. You'll just get beat up. In the urban ministry, every ministry is hard. Urban ministry has its own unique hardness about it. It's intense. It's tiring. People are packed together. They're demanding. It's all those kind of things. Frankly, that's spreading out to the suburbs too. But there's just a uniqueness. You walk out your front door and there's like sirens 24 hours. There's no stars over the city. I don't know if you knew that, but there's no stars over Chicago. It's lit all the time. I mean, there's just some funky different things. There's crime everywhere. You get on the bus. My favorite thing, frankly, is riding the L of the bus because the city comes to that place. You got the guy in the three-piece suit, and you got the man who lives on the street who's wet himself and smells like it on the bus. You know, you're navigating all those kind of things. I didn't do public transportation. I lived out in the suburbs. I drove everywhere. And so you have these kind of things. So be anchored in the gospel. Be a student, a learner. Be willing to say, I didn't know that. Can you help me? Teach me? I'll never forget sitting outside a restaurant at this place that I was studying that I used to go to every morning. Our offices changed, but I used to go there every morning. And I got to know one of the guys living on the street because he would come and pick food out of the trash can. And so what I began to do was order my breakfast and always take half out to him. I got to know him. Very intelligent. Very articulate. Shocked me the first time I spoke to him. And he looked back at me and spoke to me. And it was like, whoa! It blew all these pictures I had. And then to ask him, how did you get there? What happened? Tell me your story. You know, you become a learner and you begin to get context. And I think you got to be a lifelong learner. The other thing is you got to say, I'm going to be here and I'm going to figure it out. And it's going to be tough, but I'm going to model for everybody else that it can happen. Make sense? But don't forget the gospel. A lot of people are in ministry. We won't be able to talk about this on Thursday, but a lot of people are in ministry for all the wrong motives. And if you're not anchored in the gospel, life will just eat you up. Ministry will just eat you up. You know why this? If I can I preach for a second? Go ahead, Jeff. You know what it is about, and I got to stand up to this. You know what it is about ministry is if I'm a lawyer and I have an affair, I maybe I have troubles in this part of my life, but I keep my job. When you and I struggle at whatever deep level, our community, our job, our church is all affected. Think about it. Everything in our life is affected. When someone's mad at you, every party you go to, that's rippled around. It's rippled around. And people don't stop to ask you for your side of the story. They just assume what this person said is true. You've been in rooms. You've walked into rooms knowing where everybody's been talking about you. How pleasant is it? Hi, how you doing? It's good to be here. Ministry's hard. And if you're not anchored in that gospel, it will eat your lunch. But if you keep coming back to the gospel and say, it's like my kids. You know, when my kids were young, they didn't care how big my ministry was. They didn't care how successful or how much I failed. I was their dad, and they delighted in me as their dad. And that's what the gospel does. We delight in our Heavenly Father, and God does not care about my success. That's not how He judges His love and His grace for me. He delights in me because of Christ. And that gives me perspective whether I'm failing or succeeding, whether my church is growing or it's declining, whether my sermon was great or it wasn't. Anyway, okay, that's fine.
I think that's a good place to end those. So, thanks so much for being with us.